So as we get started, I first wanted to say, because we're meeting today on a virtual platform and are calling in from around the world, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands and coasts that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. In particular, we would like to acknowledge the lands of our host institutions for this summit session in particular.
Yeah, and we'd really like to acknowledge that in San Diego, we're on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of our San Diego community. And we'd like to warmly acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them greatly for their stewardship.
And I'm coming to you from Hobart, Tasmania, and I would like to acknowledge the Muawina people on whose land I come to you today. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and recognise their continual connection to and custodianship of the land here in Nipaluna, Lutrawina for more than 40,000 years.
Wonderful. And will each of the conference organizers will introduce ourselves. I'm Anna Zivian. I am Senior Research Fellow at Ocean Conservancy, which is an ocean-focused non-governmental organization. I'm also co-chair of the Ocean Knowledge Action Network Development Team and a member of the Ocean Vision Steering Committee. I'm a social scientist by training and work on ocean climate change and equity and justice issues, among others. I'm very focused on policy and solutions, so this is a great session for me to be listening to. Thank you.
Karen, you're muted.
Of course I'm on mute. You'd think I'd have this down pat by now. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are around the world. My name is Karen Evans, and I'm a Principal Research Scientist at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, or CSIRO, which is Australia's national research agency, and who is a partner in the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions program. I'm also a member of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development Decade Advisory Board, and a member of the Group of Experts for the United Nations Global Integrated Marine Assessment. I work across national and international fisheries and marine biodiversity assessments at national, regional, and global scales. And I consider myself as a knowledge broker on that interface between science and policy. Thank you.
Great. And yeah, hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Erin Satterthwaite, and I'm a researcher, extension specialist, and program coordinator with California Sea Grant at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I work to link the information from long-term ocean observing programs to researchers and practitioners to work towards sustainable use of marine ecosystems, especially in the face of climate change. And I also have helped to develop the Early Career Ocean Professional Program, which aims to promote the inclusion of diverse voices of the next generation of ocean leaders in international policy processes. And I became involved in Ocean Visions and the GEOS community because I'm passionate about thinking about how we develop more sustainable and equitable ocean solutions through diversity and engagement. And so I'm super excited for this session today.
Wonderful. And I'll give a quick overview of how this session will run. With the myriad of issues facing the ocean and all of us, and in particular, accelerating anthropogenic change, it's clear that we need inclusive, equitable, effective solutions for ocean functioning, health, and in Martin Visbeck's framing, prosperity, which is for hope, and for safe, sustainable, and thriving communities. From individuals to the international community, the ocean's importance in addressing global crises like biodiversity loss and climate change, including the important United Nations initiatives that started this year, such as the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. To achieve a sustainable future for our oceans, it's clear that we need to explore a wide range of solutions. And these solutions have to be co-designed, co-produced, and co-delivered by a full range of knowledge holders and end users. For this session, we wanted to explore ways of bringing different perspectives into the ocean solution sphere with a specific focus on inclusivity and belonging. To that end, we're bringing together panelists with expertise in very different ways of relating to the ocean to talk about how they see solutions. The session will start with an overview of an initiative to bring networks together to explore, share, and amplify solutions. That's GEOS, the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions. Following that, Rosanna Shah of the LA Times will moderate a panel of experts who will talk about their experiences with ocean solutions and answer questions from the audience. Finally, we'll wrap up with some next steps as we move forward with GEOS. Please submit questions through the chat, and we will try to get through as many as we can. And as you all know from our year plus of Zoom, please stay on mute when you're not speaking. Go off mute if you are. It's easy to forget. I, in fact, just ended up sharing a conversation with my boyfriend with a full Zoom room of colleagues 2 days ago. So it's easy to forget. I will now turn it over to Karen. Thank you. And I'll go on mute.
And I'll unmute. So as Anna mentioned, we've just entered the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which will run through to 2030. And the impetus for this decade really came from the findings of the first United Nations World Ocean Assessment released in 2016, which identified that the state of the marine environment was declining as a result of pressures being placed on it as a consequence of human activities, both in the ocean but also on land, noting that the land and the ocean are intricately linked. It was unlikely that the world would achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 14, Life Below Water, without significant innovations and efforts founded on science and novel partnerships between science, business, industry, finance, government, and communities. This decade really aims to provide the framework to bring diverse actors and sectors together to co-develop, co-design, and co-implement solutions that will ensure future sustainability based on 7 key outcomes: a clean ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a productive ocean, a predicted ocean, an accessible ocean, and an inspiring and engaging ocean. It is within this concept that the global ecosystem of ocean solutions has been developed. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Karen. At this point, I would like to introduce Manu to talk about the GEOS concept. Emanuele Di Lorenzo is a professor and the founding director of the program in Ocean Science and Engineering, OSE, at the Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech, where he has created partnerships with NGOs and private industries. He's a member of innumerable boards, including US CLIVAR, Pisces, the Ocean Knowledge Action Network Development Team, and of course, Ocean Visions. He's also one of the most collaborative people I know, and I'm lucky enough to have been able to work with him on Ocean Visions and the Ocean Knowledge Action Network, and sometimes even in Italian. Manu will introduce the GEOS program, which has recently been submitted for endorsement under the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And if you have any questions regarding GEOS, please contact Manu after the session. If you have any questions about the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, please contact Karen Evans. And Manu.
Thank you for this great introduction. And before starting my talk, I just want to say that working with Anna, Karen, and Erin, and so many others on this GEOS has been a highlight of this year in COVID land, where we had so many Zoom calls that were so enriching, especially for the chemistry of this group that has come together. So the way that I was going to introduce GEOS together with Karen, who helped me organize this talk, is we prepared a video so that we can share this video later for people that cannot make this time zone. So I'm going to play this video, and then we can start our conversation. So I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. Hello, my name is Emanuele Di Lorenzo, and I serve as the founding chairman of Ocean Visions. I'm also the professor and director of the program in Ocean Science and Engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology. With me today, joining me, is also Karen Evans, principal research scientist at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, also known as CSIRO, in Australia. I want to thank the organizers for inviting Karen and I to provide an overview of an effort called the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions, also referred so far as GEOS. In this short talk, we will provide a quick history, motivation, and goals of GEOS, and a brief overview of the approaches that we're taking for advancing ocean solutions to the growing pressures of climate and human activities. In 2018, a set of international partners that have a strong interest in advancing and deploying ocean solutions came together to develop a proposal to establish GEOS as a formal program to support and advance the activities of the United Nations Decade for Ocean Sustainable Development. GEOS is born out of the recognition that in order to make significant advances, we need to establish a vibrant multi-sector community that can co-design and deploy equitable, durable, and scalable ocean-based solutions for climate change and the ocean grand challenges. The many partners listed here reflect this diversity of multi-sector actors from research organizations, industry, startup, and the investment world. And I would like to acknowledge and thank the contributors: Future Seas, CSIRO, the Indian National Center for Ocean Information, the American Geophysical Union, the Ocean and Climate Platform, the North Pacific Marine Science Organizations, PICES, the newly launched 1,000 Ocean Startup Coalition, which will have their formal launch on May 27, the Blue Tech Cluster Alliance, which is a global network of industry-led blue tech clusters that are committed to collaboration for advancing the ocean economy, the UNESCO, the Ocean Vision, of course, which I represent, and very importantly, the Early Career Ocean Professionals, or ECOP network, which is a cornerstone of GEOS. And as you have seen from this week, they have been a major player in the organization of this summit, with over 650 ECOP participants across 75 countries. In fact, Erin Satterthwaite, one of the ECOP co-founder, is also co-organizing this session. The foundation of GEOS is designed following the Ocean Vision model and relies on three main interacting elements that accomplish specific functions. The networking and community building, which has a goal to convene a multi-sector and multidisciplinary, inclusive and transparent ocean solution community. And this summit, in fact, was co-designed with several of the GEOS partners with this intention and spirit in mind. In fact, the title of the summit is Towards a Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions. The second component is the establishment of task forces or equivalent working groups, the goal of which is to use the multi-sector network to co-design system-level solutions to the grand challenges that can inspire perhaps new programs or projects under the Ocean Decade, and also pilot projects that transform research into practical solution actions. Under the decade, the concept of ocean solutions is implicit in several of the challenges. However, we cannot rely on solutions in different areas coalescing to solve the big problems. But we must intentionally assemble the pieces to solve these big challenges that require an integrated, synergistic portfolio of solutions from the different dimensions: environmental, social, finance, industry, and policy. And this is the focus of GEOS. The third component of GEOS is the innovation engine, and the goal of which is to help prototype, accelerate, fund, and deploy solutions. The GEOS engine function relies on involving startups, private businesses, industry, and investors with a focus on the grand challenges. And here I would like to clarify an important point about innovation and acceleration. There's a bit of a misconception that the ocean sustainable economy is going to provide the solutions to most problems, as it will lead to sustainable development. However, the blue economy is only one part of the solution, because as mentioned earlier, the more difficult challenges such as climate change and its impacts on marine ecosystems and coastal communities requires bringing together solutions from a diverse range of industry, businesses, and finance and government institutions in a systemic and synergistic way. So in this sense, GEOS aims at serving as a think tank behind a coordinated action for solutions. An example of the GEOS in action comes from recent work of the Ocean Vision Task Force on Ocean Carbon Dioxide Removal, also known as Ocean CDR. Back in 2020, a series of ideation workshops were launched to examine the development and scalability of Ocean CDR strategy based on microalgal cultivation and sequestration, ocean alkalinity enhancement, and electrochemical approaches. Following the convening of this multi-sector network of CDR experts, innovators, and investors, a set of solution roadmaps for Ocean CDR were produced that clearly identify key needs, obstacles, opportunities, and priorities for ocean-based CDR pathways, and examine these from a range of perspectives and discipline, including the natural sciences, engineering, policy, government, economics, social equity, and others. These roadmaps are now available, for example, as a dynamic web app that allows the Ocean CDR community to continue to update their content and keep them live. And they provide the foundation for deploying targeted pilot projects that mobilize the innovation engine. An example of such pilot project where scientists, industry, and investors are coming together to evaluate the feasibility and scalability of Ocean CDR technologies comes from Running Tide, a company who is developing a system to grow and sink microalgae in the open ocean and sequester carbon in the deep ocean. This pilot was funded by the Grantham Environmental Trust and is joined by a network of multi-sector researchers that provide on-demand expertise on the different dimensions of the pilot, including its environmental impact. Other similar projects are also currently unfolding under the Ocean Vision CDR effort using the GEOS approach, and other grand challenges such as equitable coastal solutions are following. Examples of these were discussed this week on Session 2 on the summit with the Cities project from the Ocean and Climate Platform and the U.S. national pilot on co-designing a roadmap for equitable coastal solutions. There are also other task forces at work through the GEOS partners on the themes of ocean and human health and marine circular economy. We have seen several examples of these this week in Session 3 on Healthy Ocean and Healthy People, organized by Future Seas and Ocean Visions and Cape Town Universities and others, and then also Session 4 on the Circular Ocean Sustainable Economy. Now, one of the goals of the GEOS is to accelerate the generation and transformation of knowledge into ocean solutions. To this end, the different components of GEOS are designed to promote this acceleration process through specific activities that are community building, broad sharing of knowledge, and training and engaging the next generation of ocean experts and leaders, who, we all know, are going to be the ones that are going to carry the flag of the ocean decade in 10 years from now. To this end, under the GEOS network, we envision several activities that include Ocean Solution Focus Summit, and the Ocean Vision Summit this year is an example of that. The next generation of shared roadmaps for solutions as a UN report outlining the portfolio and deployment path for a systemic level equitable ocean solutions, and an early career leadership fellow program to build cohorts that can operate across the GEOS dimensions. And finally, a multi-sector platform that allows on-demand access to ocean experts to provide a trusted source of advice and critical research to pilot projects, startup, industry stakeholders, and other sectors. Similarly, within the GEOS innovation engine, we envision a set of related efforts that are integrated with the network and task forces, including the development of an open access ocean solution master program combined with an internship industry matching program across the global partners to train the next generation of ocean leaders that are capable to navigate this new, complex, multi-sector and multidisciplinary ocean solution space. I hope this gives you a good flavor of the GEOS approach for accelerating ocean solutions and also provides you more context on the goals of the Ocean Vision Summit and the many contributions from partners across the different continents. We obviously have a lot of work to do, as the ocean solution community, despite the urgency, is still small and fragmented. It is our hope that under the umbrella of the UN Decade for Ocean Sustainable Development, we can better come together and call all hands on deck to co-design and deploy ocean solutions that are scalable, equitable, and systemic in addressing the grand challenges associated with the growing climate and human pressures. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Manu. I actually think you were fast enough that if somebody has a question that they'd like to put in the chat very quickly, we have time for one. But otherwise, as we noted before, if you have questions on the decade, please contact Karen. And if you have questions for Manu, send them to him and he'll be happy to answer them later. So at this point, I am absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Yoshitaka Ota. And Dr. Yoshitaka Ota is the director of the Nippon Foundation Ocean Nexus Center, which is an international initiative comprising an interdisciplinary team of 20 and more than 20 institutes. His core research interest is to understand how to strengthen social equity in ocean governance while we face global environmental changes and challenges. I first met Yoshi over a decade ago when I was just getting into the ocean realm, and he is one of the most interesting, provocative thinkers I know working on ocean and coastal issues, and thus the perfect person to kick us off. After his talk, we'll have the opportunity for a few questions from the audience. And again, please put your questions in the chat. Thank you, and take it away, Yoshi.
Okay, let me just start. So it is starting. Can you see my slide?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't hear any of you, but I'm just assume you guys
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. And yeah, you're also one of the most interesting, provocative thinker that I met through the ocean. So same thing back to you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about like a diversity, equity, and justice for oceans and human systems. I mean, this JEDI, so JEDI, so justice, equity, diversity, inclusion conversation is getting more and more popular in both marine conservation and ocean governance. But we also have idea, you know, it's like what it is all about, you know, what's got to do with science, to be quite honest, and some of the question came up. So this is something I've been working on as a social anthropologist. My background is really to understand the society and the relationship between human and ocean. And we actually consider the nature as something including a people. So that's my background and stuff. So kind of like putting myself as a position where I can kind of like legitimately speak some of the things that we're supposed to talk about here. I had an opportunity to run Nippon Foundation NERS program at the University of British Columbia between 2011 to 2019. And this is, our aim was predicting future ocean. And it was just tremendous to work with various institutes and professors who really trying to kind of like a project and understand what the future ocean will be, what's the impact of the climate change, you know, how does this degradation of the biodiversity would actually affect the fisheries, you know, what is the issue with our governance, how can we actually consider more equitable way to really distribute the burden. So that's the sort of things we're working in predicting future ocean between 2011 and 2019, and I was a policy director, together with my science director, William Chun in University of British Columbia. I then actually moved to the University of Washington, just crossed the border from Canada to the US. And that time it was rare. And start working in University of Washington. And last year I established this new research initiative called Nippon Foundation Ocean Nexus. This one different from the predictive virtual ocean. It's more about the social science. It's more about the human systems. It's really about the something we call about the ocean equity. So my trajectory was fishing community to interdisciplinary to the science, which I couldn't do, but I learned a lot, and policy, then human systems, and diversity, equity, and justice. So that's what I have been doing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So through the work of NERS, Predicting Future Ocean, and this is a book we published with 50 chapters, and then I have to write a conclusion as being director. And so I just reduced all the 50 chapters and all the results of the studies on extreme event and studies of biodiversity and studies about like conflicts and studies about blue economy and SDGs into basically 2 points, which are extremely simple, but I hope it appeals to you. So the first one is impacts of global environmental change will be overall negative for sustainability. Ocean sustainability or ocean human relationship sustainability, both the same to me, but if you can think about it that way, that'd be great. So this is hard to say no, really, I suppose. And the second one, which when I started this project, I didn't really think about it, but it became so apparent that increases in global, so this, global environmental change, as much as other changes are happening in the relationship between the ocean and the people, it's really increasing in the global, local inequalities. It just creates a disparity between people who actually benefit from the ocean and the people who don't. And this just came as a huge issue, and especially if you're interested in equity and inclusion and diversity and justice. So for instance, the work with the Vicky Lam and Wen Chen and et al. Just really projected change in the global fisheries revenue. That climate change impact will really hit, the places where equatorial areas, this is because of the fish ecology, because of the reduction of the change and the catches. And that's what really just put the different burden on the different communities and geographically. And other things, which is work on the Cisneros Montemayor, under Cisneros Montemayor, there's this huge kind of like interest in development and under the name of the blue economy or blue growth. But there's sort of like issues with equities. Some of the coastal sort of development are not really governed well. And some of the issues with pushing the fisheries even forward under the name of this sort of like a food security potentially is really causing some of the issues, which doesn't really deny the food security, but sometimes it doesn't really consider about the food sovereignty issues. So there's like a lot of issues in development. And also, this is part of the research I did, is really looking at the coastal indigenous communities that depends on the seafood. There was just absolutely no record, no global views, no outlook whatsoever. So just together with my 10 colleagues, so we actually gathered everything that we have as indigenous communities seafood consumption rates. And the result was they still have a huge dependency of coastal indigenous people really on their fisheries, really on their subsistence catches and food. And then that was just so apparent globally. Everywhere we found the record, and everywhere it was really making quite significant. So other things which painfully that I need to talk about is there's been issues with forced labor in fisheries. There is an issue about not ensuring equity and equitable opportunity to the benefit for the small communities, and also the improvement food and the livelihood and the security are still really behind. These are the issues that we're facing, and we really have to consider what is socially responsible, what is even just legally and not criminal. So good news, supposedly, is this SDG that leave no one behind. As preamble says, it's really just point of the SDGs. And what we need to do is we mix it together, not mix it together, but we just consider how we can achieve life below underwater. Number 14, as you can see it, can really contribute to other goals. So this is the work Gerald Sim did, and what it shows is on the left side corner, it's all the marine and ocean targets. And the other, on a horizontal level, it's all about other goals. So how much marine targets actually contribute to other things. So if you achieve marine pollution, you will contribute to poverty, if you contribute and also contribute to food security. So it's like a number one, and number two, poverty and food, hunger, alleviation is very heavy. And it's just a bunch of, different things. But this really shows how important, ocean targets in sustainable development is really to other goals. But the actual important message from this is to achieve this so-called core benefit. We really have to think about what and how we can implement these ocean targets. For instance, don't worry about this constant catch share. This sort of like a lines is really how turtles and albatross and in so-called culturally important species for the indigenous community, which are dark dots, really are. And it just obviously cross over high seas, they cross over everywhere. But yet, as you know, the BBNJ or area beyond national jurisdiction, high seas discussion really includes those coastal communities. And then also, this is one of the example that I realized that I came across the other day. It's about the herring fisheries, which in Alaska, which is supposedly most, sustainably managed things, but yet they actually do not take into account of indigenous people's consumption of the herring throw, which has been, which is actually the sign of the spring for Sitka people in a trinket. When the spring comes, herring comes back and then put the rows, and then that food is really their food sovereignty. And other things about like injustice to the indigenous groups and the communities just everywhere. You can actually see the severity is a larger bubbles and getting smaller and smaller, but there's a conflict against the government, conflict against the development, conflict against, some of you may actually question mark, but against conservation efforts and MPAs. There's just issues with community versus with somebody who actually comes with the power. So what do we need to be careful about this? We're at the stage of, for instance, blue economy. And blue economy is understood as like, okay, oceans are natural capital, drivers of innovations and livelihood and good businesses. It's just a huge potential we've been showing and, somehow really visioned in a way that it's very appealing to both communities and industries and maybe conservation. So it's like supposed to be win-win-win. But however, and this is sort of like a vision, right? We can just win a future and this is what we can actually have. But do we actually think about like three very important things which sustainably, which makes supposedly blue economy? That is it socially equitable? Is it ecologically sustainable? Is it economically viable? Is it really, this is what the blue economy is supposed to be? So how can we develop it? How can we work on this? So I did a paper with Andres Montemayor, which published in the Nature about a month ago, plus. So what we did is we looked, okay, what's economic viability? What's the social equity? What's the resource availability? What's the environmental sustainability? We just plotted all this with lots of data and it came up with something called the blue economy capacity, which is supposed to be, those three rings together. And then we found there's a mismatch or there's a difference between what the countries and the regions are thriving at or trying to be thriving at and what we think they should really care about. So Africa, there's a non-renewable interest in the non-renewable like oil and the seabed minerals. But if you think about developing goals and for local livelihood and food security, you require more attention for coastal artisanal fisheries and small-scale mariculture. In Asia, there's a huge high resource availability in like Southeast Asia, but yet there is a still focus on the shipping and in technology express community goals are closer to marine living resources. I mean, that's much more important. So really consider artisanal fisheries, protect mariculture, ecotourism, carbon uptake, which is really in the scale that is supposed to be suitable for their rural context. In Americas, there's the huge point of natural capitals, but I'll skip all this, but it's important. Those countries which share colonial histories and about different development goals and capacity to have a vision, to have a collaboration. And then finally, Oceania, what really prioritizing is traditional resource use. Emerging sectors, but yet can be developed in accordance with this local development goals. And I call for the international support for these initiatives, which is really important and useful, not only just for the regional issues, but perhaps for us to understand there is a way to see the ocean and the human relationship in a different way. So my point in this paper is really what we are missing is not really just the resource availability, not about ecological sustainability, not just about the social equity, but really what we call about governance. Let's make sense of what we can actually and should be working towards if we really think about goodness over the all. So we are actually going for the policy instead of just looking at ocean exploitation and exploration and prediction, and then get to the data and then get to the global societal outcome. It's not just a linear like that. If we really wanted to think about it, we have to think about the solution-oriented science, such as get access and priorities and the problems of the ocean-dependent people, and ocean science for understanding context of problems, and propose, implement, test science-based solutions, and then that will potentially contribute not just the SDG outcome, but for more. So this is the paper we did about this. If you have a time, please read it. It's in the PNS, and it's about like in January. So what we're saying is science, diversity, equity, justice, what's important? It's got to be solution-based. It just needs stakeholders' perspectives. It's really that important. And when I'm talking about stakeholders, I'm not really talking about industry. I'm afraid I'm talking about the community people. And more science to evaluate existing problem. Does it really make sense or it doesn't make sense? And then recognize marginalization and avoid science being complicit of these act and injustice. So finally, I'm kind of like a flip the usual donuts that you probably haven't seen in many places, which started from biosphere and then goes to society and it goes up to the economy. Those three ladders, how we actually take care of the sustainability in the earth. I would say, why don't we start with the society? And then some people actually question, what do you mean? How can you actually make sure the biospace is really sort of like a sustainable? That's what we do. We find the partners and stakeholders who really lives and cares and considers stewardship. And then we work towards that. That's the way to go. So in my institute, Ocean Nexus, what we see is a missing link, and we're trying to fill missing link. There's all fisheries, sustainable fisheries, but between, let's think about the food sovereignty. There's a blue economy, sustainable ocean economy. Let's think about gender intersectionality. As you know, this is a huge issue. Climate change, climate adaptation, how about climate justice in the middle of the conversation? Marine plastic, for example, zero waste. What about addressing global production? And more frankly, potentially neoliberalism. And slavery and labor abuse. To go to the equity of supply chain, we really have to consider about decolonization. So let me just say, this is what we are doing. And we're trying to recognize the inequality. We're trying to recover social inequity, and we're hoping to reverse injustice with more justice. And my claim to you all is this is really a huge task. And then this is not just about the governance and society and the human systems in the ocean. This is really the work that we actually think about to, provide kind of like an ocean for all people. I really see the ocean, I like ocean because it's just such a flat place, where everybody is pretty much supposedly equal, and where everybody has a different memories in the different oceans, and embracing the diversity. So this is my pledge to you all. My center will just work on this, and as much as I'm holding you accountable, please hold us accountable for this action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yoshi. We have 2 questions that came in, and that's about what we have time for.
Right,
Actually,
that's
now
great.
there's a 3rd question. I will read the first 2, or and they, you may want to answer them together. One was the person who asked it noticed that it looks like North American indigenous folks had less dependence on ocean food for than other continental folks. And is that because of preference or because the resources have been depleted already?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. It's basically looking at the average between the national average and the coastal indigenous people. So it's not really about like the how much they're depending on it. They're largely dependent on it, but they also have a in a not great way, because I know the reality of it. Shops and everything is just too expensive, and they don't really want to depend on it. But there's just a limit of the food and the source and availability and then access, and at the same time they have other food source not available, but they just have access, and I think that came as a result. But this is very general things. So if you look at the different communities, it's really different. One interesting things I wanted to add is we look at some of those actually had the historical record, and we kind of think, okay, historically maybe it's going down, the consumption is going down, changing the food behavior and then all this. But any of those historical record, it was all straight. It was all straight. It's just no changes. So we're just trying to find how and why. But yeah, just that's the future things we're going to work on and trying to publish.
Super. And another question that came in was, how will ocean and coastal data that scientists collect benefit, or will ocean and coastal data that scientists collect benefit indigenous peoples? And I would love it. There is one more question from Mark, but if you can answer that maybe in the chat, that would be great. But how will data benefit indigenous peoples?
Many places that I work in and that I know that they have always a conflict between what has been proposed as some of the scientific result translated into the policy are not really reflecting their reality. As I said, this having a case in Sitka in northern Alaska, the department is saying like, look, we've been looking into this, we've been doing a fisheries management, it's supposed to be fine. But in reality, they're not getting the herring back. And then that's when the scientist can help, just trying to figure out what it is. And it's not only that, but it's trying to really just open up ideas about open the conversation with the people, please, because I, have often issues with this just putting into the traditional knowledge as kind of like the same as a science, because it's a very different category, and it's so-called the category mistakes, because it has a memory and a history, and things are not really, same as how science approach. But what we really need is how to take account for all this information and then bring it into the governance and bring it into the governance conversations and make each of the opinion really counts. I think that's what matters, and that's what the scientists can help the community to work together.
Thanks so much. And as I said, there's a comment in the chat. It's, as always, wonderful to see you.
No, good
I'll turn it over to Erin now.
Right, thanks a lot.
Great, thanks. That was fabulous. And thanks so much for the thought-provoking talk and great questions. And so now we're going to transition to the panel discussion, where we'll hear from a range of amazing speakers discussing their perspectives, kind of addressing this, how do we continue to build an inclusive global ecosystem for practical ocean solutions? So really following up, Yoshi, I think, on your talk. And so we'll start off by introductions from each of the panelists, followed by a Q&A session. And so please do send questions through the chat box during that time. And so now I'd like to introduce our fabulous moderator for the panel discussion, Rosanna Shaw. And she's an environmental reporter for the Los Angeles Times with a focus on the coast and ocean. And her stories connect science and policy and have led to new laws and regulations in California. And really, we're super grateful to have her join us and moderate the discussion today. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And wow, what a great opening to this session. And I'm honored to now introduce our speakers for the next part of the session. And I think we're bringing them onto the screen, but we have Rachel James. Rachel's work covers social and environmental justice, environmental advocacy, policy drafting that supports corporations, industry, and governments to improve environment and social management and good governance. She has done a lot of work with remote coastal and island communities in the Pacific Island region who are on the front lines of climate change to support community-based management, alternative livelihoods, and conservation efforts to support climate resilience. Rachel recently joined WWF Australia Pacific as the Blue Pacific Program Manager. Rachel, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. And so next we have also Mark Chavez. So in 2000, 21 years ago, out of San Diego, California, Mark founded intertribalyouth.org and nativelikewater.org based on developing a working model for community and institutional education. The program's aim is to indigenize education and has been nationally and internationally recognized as a holistic approach to education. Youth and mentors from across North America, Hawaii, Panama, Mexico, Jamaica attend various national, international summer and spring programs. Mark has created mentorship, vision, and healthy learning environments for the past 21 years. Mark, thank you for joining us today. And we also have Professor Kimberly Norris, who is a psychological scientist and clinical psychologist who works across academic, research, and clinical practice settings. Primarily based at the University of Tasmania, her overarching research and academic interests are focused on maximizing human health, well-being, and performance in both normal and extreme environments. So cool. Kimberly, thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, we have Courtney Madison, who is a Los Angeles-based artist who handcrafts intricate and large-scale ceramic sculptural works inspired by the fragile beauty of coral reefs and the human-caused threats they face, particularly climate change. Her background in marine conservation science informs her work, which has been commissioned internationally for permanent collections, including the US Embassy in Jakarta, and exhibited in museums and lobbies across the United States. Courtney, hello, and everyone check out her amazing background, which we will be hearing more about. So wow, what a panel. And thank you all for being here. So before we dive into a discussion, I'd love for each of you to share some opening thoughts, tell us a little bit more about what you're working on and something maybe you'd like us to keep in mind as we think about building an equitable and inclusive system for ocean solutions. And Rachel, could you kick us off?
Before I start, I would just like to acknowledge the Kabi Kabi people on which the lands that I am based upon in Sunshine Coast. Thank you. Basically, I'm representing the ECOPS as well. And obviously from my work across the Pacific Islands, Yoshi covered a lot of it, but basically, you know, advocating for more inclusive involvement of communities in decision making and being part of the process. From my career experience, Indigenous communities, local people are often left out of the equation, and there's this top-down power structure hierarchy where a lot of the development donors and research institutions that are coming into developing countries to help solving the problem, they're coming from a top-down approach, and we need more bottom-up involvement and valuing our traditional Indigenous knowledge. Like, there is a wealth of traditional science knowledge base that we're not tapping into. And, you know, from my position, my experience, my role, I would just like to advocate for more value of our traditional knowledge base, because there's a wealth of knowledge there that we're missing that link, as Yoshi said, and we need to really connect all the links, top down, bottom up, and involve more more local community people in this decision process. In my work, I've just joined WWF, and I'll be heading up the new Blue Pacific programs. And my main objective and goal is to support this. Obviously, the goals of GEOS, I'll be working really hard to promote more community-based work and empowering people. The other side of this coin is a lot of the finance models and power structure of finance and investment. We don't get bang for buck into community projects and development programs supporting and solving our sustainability problems. So I would like to see more finance, the power structure, more investment into some of the solutions and workable solutions, instead of a lot of the finance and funding going to what we call parachute research or outside organizations. So basically, I just advocate for more, obviously, equitable opportunities all around in helping solve our ocean solutions and problems.
Thank you for that. And oh my goodness, Zoom issues, my internet freaked out for a second, but thank you for sharing that. And so I missed like about 30 seconds of what you just said, but I would love to bring in Mark, and I will play catch up, but thank you so much for your opening remarks.
Thank you all for having me. And thank you, Rachel, for your great words. I do also share the same sentiments. We work in different areas, but I will speak specifically more on Southern California, which is, of course, a very large populated area of the Pacific Ocean, particularly for the West Coast United States. I work with local tribes in Southern California. In San Diego, particularly, there is 17 tribes, half of them which were relocated from the coast to inland, about an hour inland. And so one of my goals has been to reintroduce our native population to the coast and to the coastal culture. As one of our mentors from Hawaii, Nainoa Thompson, who's a great navigator, he says, we can't protect something we don't understand. And so what he did is, with the Polynesian Voyaging Society, went out with the Hokulea and circumnavigated the globe on a traditional voyaging canoe, which really touched me a lot, because with our population that I work with in the Native American population of Southern California, being relocated inland, we're about 2 or 3 generations from practicing our coastal culture. So when we want to be part of this discussion or part of this dialogue, a big thing for me is having to kind of re-understand or reconnect with the ocean. And in a form, what we expose not only youth but adults to is kind of different science research with Scripps Institute of Oceanography. But one of the biggest things I think that has struck the interest of understanding these coastal environments have been coastal recreation. And what I call coastal recreation, lately have been really looking at that word recreation and breaking it down to that recreation of what it means to have us be present in this environment. And what does that bring? Not just individually for our memory or our DNA memory, but also our practice. As we all know, it's not really what you believe, it's what you practice. So having us involved and being able to surf or paddleboard is that portal back to that recreation or to that participation. And so I'm on that. And once we have these folks who are now back again reunited with this ocean environment, we have people who are interested who probably can be on that table of inclusion, of understanding what it means to be again around these ocean environments, these water environments. So a big part of what we do is also to review our traditional cultural knowledge, which again does not exist in abundance as far as based on the historical trauma and things that have happened over the last couple generations. So for us to actually to be going down this path of finding out what it means, what is our maritime story for Southern California tribal tribal groups, what is our maritime story? And just like Rachel said, our contributions are so huge. The colonial time frame is 500 plus years. It's a kind of a drop in the bucket when you think about the tens of thousands of years that we've been contributing to these environments. Just off the coast of San Diego, we have tribal villages that are underwater, that are over 10,000 years old. Right off Scripps Institute of Oceanography, we have these villages. So we've already seen these climate changes in our history and know what these things mean in practical form, in the sense that we've experienced them. So our contributions and kind of recultivating that in our mind and our participation is a huge part of what we're doing. And a lot of it is kind of interesting because we have to pull from folks, from everybody, we have to collaborate with folks like here at this conference to be able to put these pieces together. And again, I look to the Hokulea Worldwide Voyage and Nainoa Thompson and what the Hawaiians did as one of the biggest affirmations of indigenous affirmation of who we are as a people, and that our maritime story is even a lot larger than just Columbus coming to America. So I'll just start with that. Thank you very much for having me.
Wow, thank you for sharing that perspective. And yeah, I'm really glad that we're starting to piece so many of the pieces to this puzzle together, and just to see how much bigger this puzzle needs to be. And I'll kick it over to Kimberly now, who also has another very interesting piece to this puzzle. Please, I'm excited to hear your opening thoughts as well.
Thanks, Rosanna. So again, like Karen, who introduced herself earlier today, I have the pleasure and privilege of living, working and recreating on the traditional lands of the Muanina and Palawa peoples. And listening to the words of both Rachel and Mark so far is actually a fundamental piece of the puzzle in terms of how we move forward to develop a sustainable ocean experience for all that includes equitable access, co-design. And in particular, listening to Mark's words and his really powerful use of the word recreate. From a psychological perspective, that's literally what we need to do. We need to create new neural pathways in the brain. And as we develop those new neural pathways in the brain, they shape action. And through shaping action, every time we engage in this new pattern of behavior, it becomes reinforced to the point that it becomes automatic. That becomes the norm. That becomes the default. And we have a really, really exciting opportunity at the moment to capitalize on, and pardon the pun, but the perfect storm of factors that can motivate people to engage in these changes. One is an increasing awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance, and prioritization of traditional knowledges. These are individuals, cultures who have occupied coastal areas for many, many thousands of years, and as such have intimate knowledge that can be used to support and guide the changes that need to be made. On top of that, we have a global pandemic that has triggered increased discussion and reflection on what is important to us as individuals, as societies, and how that then shapes our belief systems. And again, as Mark was flagging before, as a psychologist, a lot of the work that I focus on is translating belief into knowledge, knowledge into behaviour. And so one of the big questions that we continue to grapple with is, if we have so much knowledge, why aren't people changing? And part of that reason is because of the fundamental way the human brain works. That if something feels completely overwhelming, we're more likely to feel helpless and hopeless. So messages of fear that may have been used in the past to try and motivate action can actually undermine what we're trying to achieve here. Instead, we need to develop a message of hope to which everyone belongs. So instead of suggesting this individual, this group, this organisation has responsibility, really what we're trying to create is a sense of shared identity where all people contribute, and through that contribution become more committed to seeing through action. And of course, I've said a couple of times now, and as have many other speakers, both keynotes as well as people so far this morning, we need to recognise that this is a multi-systems approach, that we need to integrate the individual, the organisational, social relationships and societal structures and factors to support this change. Because the other factor that I'm working with simultaneously here is an increasing rate of climate distress, people experiencing anxiety and other negative impacts on their mental health due to the very genuine and real risks posed to our climate. So I'll stop there and hand back to you, Rosanna.
Thank you for those opening thoughts. We all have so many questions that I hope we'll have time to dive into more. And speaking of create though, Courtney, tell us about your world of creation. And yeah, welcome to, I'm just so happy you're a part of this panel as well today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be a part of it. This is such a fun group. I might try to share my screen really quick just to share some images of my work to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. I'm a ceramic sculptor. I create really large scale sculptural works, often wall reliefs that are inspired by the fragile beauty of coral reefs and the human caused threats that they face. And I particularly focus a lot of my work on climate change and ocean acidification. I feel like art has a really strong power to inspire people to have that sense of hope that Kimberly was talking about, and really connect to the natural environment in ways that we may not otherwise just by looking at data or journal articles, things like that. I think art can move us emotionally, and I feel like exploring the natural environment does a similar thing for us psychologically. And so I have been really fortunate to explore coral reefs around the tropics, and I feel like I'm very fortunate to have been able to see them, and I find them very sculptural, and so I want to bring them kind of above the surface and into view for people. And also highlight how important they are for all the ecosystem services they provide, while also highlighting how threatened coral reefs are by climate change and other human impacts like overfishing and land-based sources of pollution. And as was mentioned earlier, we protect what we care about, and we care about what we know and understand. And so I really think that by bringing kind of the plight of coral reefs and the beauty of them above the surface for people to appreciate, we can connect in new ways to the issues and hopefully act to protect coral reefs while we still can. And that can be kind of a proxy for other ecosystems that we need to protect as well. Coral reefs are just a good example of a way to visualize climate change and kind of feel it in a more visceral way. So these are just some examples of my work. This is the largest work I created. This is called Our Changing Seas 5. It's called Confluence, and it was a commission by the Art and Embassies Department at the State Department. And I created it in 2018. It's about 28 feet tall and 404 pieces. And I'm sitting in my studio in Los Angeles right now, where I create all of my work on the floor. I build everything kind of like a gigantic three-dimensional puzzle. This is another work called Malum Geminos that explores kind of the dual threats of ocean acidification and climate change in terms of threatening coral reefs. So playing with lots of different concepts from climate science and then trying to translate them into kind of hopefully emotionally stimulating forms that get people to care more and kind of become curious about how they are personally affecting and affected by the health of the natural environment. And I've also done a bit of outreach work. And so this is a project I did for the Coral Triangle Center in Bali for their Center of Marine Conservation. And we had over 300 people involved in creating ceramic anemones and corals. And we ended up creating over 2,000 of them for a permanent installation. And I think art can also serve as a really good teaching tool and a way to raise awareness. And so I do workshops occasionally. This was during a cultural exchange I did with the Office of Art and Embassies in Jakarta and Alor Island and different parts of Indonesia, where individual students would actually create their own sculptural corals. And so that was another way to connect kids and get them excited about coral reefs and appreciate how important they are. So there are kind of two different ways to go at it, but that's it for me for now.
Wow, thank you. And you also have you have a conservation biology background, right? Could you talk a little bit how science moved into art?
Yeah, so I have a background mostly in ocean ecology and focusing on coral reefs and policy also. And so I have a master's in environmental studies and studied art kind of as a way to communicate what I was learning in a way that I felt could be more powerful for my kind of unique set of interests.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for just those, just these opening thoughts, and just I love the mosaic that we're kind of weaving together. And so as we talk about solutions, you know, I'm really heartened to hear how much, at least in this space, that we are really recognizing this question, like who has been historically erased from the solution building process. And I think building on that, how do we not only bring these perspectives now to the table, so to speak, but also center them and actually empower them to truly be part of the process, to acknowledge and recognize their expertise. And you know, Rachel, maybe you can start. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How can we better support, for example, the island communities and nations that on the front lines of climate change that you've been working with? Like, how can we better involve them in decisions and research tech and solutions? Like, yeah, could you kick us off with that?
I think right across the Pacific region, there's an amazing array of locally based community organizations, and they are so empowered with their own local knowledge base and understanding of the complex social and environmental system that we operate in. And I think by empowering and working directly with the community-based organizations that have really got some really good programs on the ground, that we can make some quick wins and make some progress. And yeah, by supporting more locally based organizations, I think is a really strong avenue for addressing some of our regional sustainability issues that we're faced with. A lot of them struggle for finance and resources, so just boosting with a little bit of more long sustainable finance support and boosting that with capacity, but letting local community organizations lead the way. I think if we're going to come in and we're going to support them, we help and assist, but we're co-supporting and letting them have that front leadership role. And I think it's very important locally, because we have always a lot of outsiders always coming in and steering the directive. And I think that's another link that stops local action and stops or disempowers local people and local specialists. And I think we need to change that power structure and acknowledge and support and allow local leadership to take the front line and lead in solving some of the solutions that we're talking about. And yeah, I think community-based organizations that are really doing good work, we need to get behind them, and others that are struggling, let's support and prop them up.
Yeah, and Mark, I mean, are you seeing this too? I think, like, how do we, I really see this kind of evolving question now of like, who do we see as expert? How do we empower and really recognize and honor that, you know, people who are living on the front lines, you know, these indigenous perspectives and histories are also expertise that needs to be valued. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. You know, it's one of those things. The population is so severely reduced, particularly in Southern, you know, all through California. But for Southern California, our population is so severely reduced that the resources that we have are very few. So we have, let's just say, a handful of resources that can speak to our ocean relationship. But there's maybe one or two, and they're, you know, they're spread so thin. So it's a tough thing. And so a lot of what I kind of do is, again, to get these folks in, to get, you know, teenagers and young adults interested in this field, so they can start being at those meetings or showing up to the table. Kind of like what Rachel said too, I think, as far as the leadership, you know, this is something that just continues to really trip me out, I guess you could say, is like, you know, we have these institutions of higher education, like these universities in San Diego or Los Angeles, that are coastal, that are sitting on you know, ancient burial grounds and on village sites, and they are super slow on recognizing the importance of disrespect or the contributions that we have. So when we talk about leadership, and you know, I don't know if the majority of the folks on this conference are academics, but we need to really pressure the leadership at the own school, you know, because I'm sitting here, when I'm saying tripping out, I'm tripping out because I'm like, these are the most educated people in the world, or the smartest people in the world, and yet we're like still ignoring or sidestepping the fact that these institutions are sitting on these properties, particularly UC San Diego, where Scripps Institute of Oceanography is. I mean, the importance of just that recognition is a great first step. I love what the Visions Conference here is doing with that recognition, and other folks are doing. But these institutions beyond that is it's that recognition. It's this perhaps signage, including us in the narrative. Like I think it was Kimberly said, it's a very psychological thing when we show up to a place and we've been erased, and we're trying to say, okay, this is our homeland. Let's get involved. Let's be a part of this. But yet there's, who else is talking about it? You know what I mean? And so this is across the board. You know, we're here talking about indigenous land and stuff like that. At the same time, we have the situation in Palestine, and we have our president, the U.S. president, you know, supporting stuff like this. So it's like, I trip out on where we should be headed and where our leaders are kind of at with it, and it kind of trips me out in a sense. So I don't know if I answered that question, but for me, I think that's the biggest thing, is that we all need to recognize these contributions and the lands when we're walking in these areas. It's not just an education for us. It's not just to empower us. It's, again, this is for the good of the whole human family. You know, these contributions. This is not just, I mean, it's a great thing, I think, for us as a people, again, being an endangered species or an endangered population as indigenous people in these areas. It's not only good for us for that recognition, but for everybody, you know, and so I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and you know, that makes me think of something, and I don't know if I'm going to phrase this question properly, but you know, I do feel like the environmental movement, the way we think about environment and science in the Western world, like, has historically focused so much on protection of animals, and not just animals, like specific endangered species, right? That's kind of been this approach. But like, you know, where do humans and people, and you just spoke about indigenous populations as endangered populations, like fit into this? Is there like could you help us walk us through a little bit, like how we can shift the way we think about people in this context of like, let's save this species from this area, and how do we shift that approach?
You know, that's a great question. And that was one of my questions I think I put out to the panelists, because I start noticing that I think folks recognize, you know, saving animals more than we kind of do to our fellow humans. And the fact that, again, we're when I say endangered, it's like a serious situation in regards to our population, and in particularly into our lifestyle. When we're talking about kind of what Yoshi was saying about how we interact with our livelihood, with our diets. We're not eating the seaweed and the seafood and some of these very, very high nutrient foods along the coastal areas because we were moved back to these rocky areas. So I sometimes I just want to stand up. I wish we had the same rights as some of the animals, where the removing would the consequences of removal is prison time or a high fine, or the fact that we can't access certain foods anymore or be on the coast in a way. It should create a stir as far as a consequence. And I bring that up particularly for folks who, I don't know if you want to call it, I don't know what they call it, white neoliberalists or whatever, that are really focused. I get a lot of requests for me to join part of coalitions on environment. And then once they send me all the work, their stuff or their layout, I don't see indigenous contributions or recognition in there. And I'm just like, wow, they want us because I think, it kind of feels good or looks good or it might fill out the whole situation. But yet in a way we're not being given the same type of importance. And again, to a people who can perhaps unlock a lot of these solutions for everybody. Again, we're talking about tens of thousands of years. We're not talking about a university that's only been around for 100 years. And there's a few scientists, which I do respect all of you all on here for that. But I'm just saying, like, one of the biggest things that we do is that collaborative effort. We bring indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and we work with the researchers. And probably the most common gratitude that I get are from the the institutional academics and research at Scripps or wherever that say, hey, gosh, they're so thirsty for this stuff too. They're so thirsty for us just being there. The idea of just being present. And for all of us who are here, who are nature lovers, who just know what it feels like, there's an unspoken vibe that happens that, like she was saying, the psychological thing, your mind, there's so many things that set just to get us back into that recreation as a kind of a human family with people who really care about the environment, but yet perhaps can't ask the dolphin or can't ask the turtle. If they did, what would dolphin and turtle say? Well, listen to, what will we say? Are you asking us? Are you giving us the time? And it's going to require patience. This is a big deal because, like Rachel said, there might be folks out there in some areas with a multitude of things, but in an area where we have such a small group, we have to do this kind of together and be super patient on this process because, thank God, we have geologists and different folks that feed me information about what's under the water off the coast, so I'm able to get that. I'm used to, from our elders, oral history, we're putting all these things together. And it wouldn't be possible unless we created these types of environments with that types of patient, which I think it should be mandatory, should be a prerequisite to moving forward with this climate change.
Yeah, and I do think, and Kimberly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. So I mean, some of it is, blind spots just based on the limitations of our lived experience, but a lot of it I also think gets to the core of power sharing, this desire to share power and to not only feel like I checked off a box of being inclusive, but how do you actually share that power? And I don't know, Kimberly, if you could speak to psychologically what the obstacles are and or how we move past that, because I do think a lot of this comes down to how we share power and whether we're willing to shift the power dynamics and the power balance of the current system. Loaded question.
Absolutely, absolutely. But one I genuinely think we need to address and be vulnerable enough to acknowledge that we have not got it right. And that's actually part of the issue and one of the barriers and obstacles that we face. When we require people to acknowledge that there are other ways, essentially, it's a form of threat. It's a form of threat to the way we are living our lives at the moment. And the threat comes from, I have to change. Now, the reality is the way the human brain works is that most of the time, for most people, even if you're not happy with something, you prefer it because it's predictable. And if something is predictable, you know how to manage, even if it's not ideal. In contrast, when we're in a position to make change or to reflect on the things that are not working, the world becomes less predictable. And when the world is less predictable, we feel somewhat out of control. And when we feel out of control, we feel unsafe. And one of three things tend to happen when we feel unsafe. The first, and it depends on who we are and the circumstances, but it might be to fight. And that's where we hold on to things for what they are right now out of fear. We may also engage in attacks towards people who are trying to make change. And so that's where you might have people engaging in undermining of conservation efforts or personal attacks on people from groups who don't align with your own thoughts or beliefs. A second is to withdraw or to flee. I'm under threat, I'm in danger, I need to stay safe. And so people pull away. The third is that people essentially become paralyzed. They become so overwhelmed by this competing demands of needing to change, perhaps wanting to change, but worried about the implications of change that people are stuck. And I think that then leads to some of these discussions that both Rachel and Mark have flagged, that to date, whilst there is increasing awareness of the absolute necessity of having traditional owners and Indigenous members not as part of, but core to, fundamental to these processes, it's really important for an issue of, firstly, communication. We are not doing things to people. We are working with people to achieve a shared goal. So that whole of human population, that whole of human community that Mark was speaking to. But when we communicate truly, when we're open to being wrong, when we're open to change, that's when trust starts to develop. And fundamentally, without trust, nothing is going to change. If we don't trust the people we are with, if we don't feel psychologically safe that this is a true engagement, then without trust, we can't empower people. And without empowerment, there is no change. So essentially what it's about doing is breaking down the silos of us and them. Because as long as we have us and them, we are going to hold on to our identity and our distinctiveness, which often means rejecting change or rejecting messages. When we break down those silos and recognize we are one human family with different perspectives that can all be harnessed to maximize health and well-being as a community, be it for the human species, other animal species, for coastal environments, when we see ourselves as belonging to one shared vision, when we're achieving shared goals that benefit all, that's when we're going to see true change. But it is frightening because it does mean breaking down existing financial structures, existing social structures that actually do benefit some groups much more than others and currently disempower some groups. We're talking about a fundamental shift. So that's that issue of threat again. And that idea also that it's somebody else's job. Somebody else will take care of this. When we all acknowledge that we have individual responsibilities that collectively allow us to progress towards a shared change, that's when those barriers will start to break down.
Absolutely. And you spoke about, hope versus fear earlier, and just, really I'm hearing like, we have to get past that feeling of fear and triggered in so many different directions in different ways towards a collective message and sense of hope and collective ownership of this hope. And Courtney, so how do you see art, helping us, inspiring us to, see what is and shifting it to what could be. I feel like there's so much opportunity there, and I'd love to hear kind of your take on just kind of what we're talking about right now and how you see art helping kind of facilitate us and, you know, guide us towards this more shared collective vision that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think the key word there is collective. I think we're all connected by the ocean. None of us would exist without water, and we all are dependent on it. And awareness is the most lacking factor in just opening people's minds to the connections that exist. And so I think that art can form those connections and new perspectives for people that haven't thought about how they might relate, like someone in the middle of, you know, the Rocky Mountains in the United States is connected to people on the coast in Timor-Leste, and like everyone depends on a healthy ocean for survival. And I think once you kind of open your mind to that importance and that sense of value, and also a sense of hope and a personal connection, I think there's a lot of power there that can inspire us to all kind of find solutions and use skills that we each uniquely have to find solutions that we can enact in our own kind of unique ways. So for me, it's art, and I feel like that's kind of the voice that I have in order to communicate, but I think everyone has their own unique way to do that. And so for me, I think that art can hopefully communicate that message and inspire people.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as an environment writer, I constantly run into kind of folks who feel powerless as an individual to even do anything. You know, they feel like they're recycling one plastic bottle and it's not going to change this whole systemic problem. And I really value kind of what your art is, you know, empowering people to at least feel like they can engage, and just taking even one step is still better than no step at all. So I think I think we have time for just kind of one more roundtable question. So I'm just going to go real broad, and maybe each person could just share a little bit. Like one thing that I really struggle with, and I feel like is an important question to continue asking, is, you know, what does success even look like for quote unquote saving the ocean? You know, we know what's good and what's bad, but, you know, what is a benchmark for success? How do you actually measure that? So perhaps could each of you share what you think a success would look like and what a measurement of that could be? Rachel, maybe you can start with us again.
So from my experience and the region in which we are in, the Pacific Islands, I would say success stories are supporting local livelihoods so that they can better manage their local marine resources, but also their, how do I put it, their social status in terms of improving their lives is in balance and in harmony. Like, we can't have our conservation goals and forget that these communities, they want to develop, they want to improve their lives. You know, climate change is really impacting coastal communities. Every year we have cyclones tearing down villages and communities, and they're continuously rebuilding. So I guess success stories, how can we help lift standard of living but support local sustainability, ocean issues such as better managing our ocean resources and fisheries and supporting those local environments to maintain, but at the same time, we have to look after those communities that are reliant, you know, and it has to happen together and collectively. I think community and social avenues have a big role to play, and the success story has to be holistic. It can't be just environment over people. It's interlinked, and I really believe a success story is a flourishing, thriving community that's healthy and well balanced and maintaining their environment. And there's a few wonderful case studies across the Pacific where, you know, communities are really doing well on this front. Yeah.
Thank you. And Mark, I'm just going across my screen. Mark, what does success look like to you, and what is a benchmark or a measurement that we can measure it with?
Well, I'm just going to say something really simple, but you know, the success, or some people say the greatest success that we have is is the fact that we could see is the laughter and the smiles of our young people still existing and playing in the ocean. For indigenous people, despite what colonialism did to California or even Southern California and our location. So when we're on the coast and sometimes we're there 50 to 75 of us all together, it brings up a feeling of just great success. We have traditionally in San Diego, we have what we call bird singers. They're kind of, they sing birds with gourd rattles, and they sing songs, and these songs are in the indigenous language of particularly, I'm going to one example of the Kumeyaay bird singers. They come down and we light the fire on the beach, and we bring different groups of bird singers down every year. And one of the bird singers came to me and says, you know, Mark, I've been singing this song since a kid with my father and my grandfather. And it talks about us being on the sand, on the coast, near on the water's edge, and our relationship to where we come from. He says, but I've never have sung it on the beach. And it just hit him at that moment that this was the first time he had his feet in the sand singing this song, because he's been singing this song again his whole life, but on the reservation, again, which is an hour or more so inland. And the fact that he was doing it for the first time, these are the dots of that recreation that he was just blown away on his own self. So the fact that we're just here and present for me is a huge success. And I have to stop and smell the roses all the time when I'm just seeing all of us there in the water, and just, you know, whether it be frolicking or doing art. A lot of what we do, you know, I really love this panel because, you know, we're overcoming so much trauma. Excuse me. We're overcoming so much trauma from being removed and from all this historical intergenerational trauma, that we have to point to things like art to just start to get it out. Because just, you know, bringing people to a meeting to talk about climate change or this or that, which again a community has been disconnected from these areas of the ocean, is not enough. You know, that's why we do these things like you know, surfing or just these fires and these songs. But an art is a big piece of it. Just sitting on the water and just making those observations. Us as you know, as some of the First Nation scientists, you know, just on these observations to start to reobserve again, to reobserve these areas. I asked, you know, how do you feel sitting on the water, you know, on the kayak just out there in the cove at La Jolla Cove, and putting this art together. And, you know, it really, really, again, opens up, I don't want to say the floodgates, but of emotions. And we're starting to see some healing. And it goes back to, we need to be in that situation so we can have that trust, because the trust has been broken. And like you said, we can't even sit on these committee meetings. I can't send to anybody to these BIPOC organizations because there's no trust, you know. And so we have to build this trust again in order for us to work together. So I think just and the best trust again is with that natural environment. That's something that hasn't changed, and it's still there for us, even though the real estate are, you know, multi-million-dollar homes, you know, dotting the coast. It's regardless of all that, the birds are still there. Our songs are still there. Our identity to that land is still there. And that's something that, again, we're recreating and we're getting back into that so we can move forward. And that's kind of the measurement of success.
Thank you. And wow, so much to think about and process. And thank you so much for sharing that. And Kimberly, I'd love to hear, yeah, what is success? How do we get there? What is success, and what are ways to measure that, if that's even possible?
So I would like to acknowledge the powerful messages that both Rachel and Mark have shared, and also acknowledge Courtney's work, because they all actually shape my response here. And I'm going to take a very psychological response, and it's not meant to be too vague, but the reality is that success will look different depending on who you are and where you are in your journey towards supporting a more sustainable ocean. There's something called the stages of change model. It's or sometimes known as the trans-theoretical model of change. And essentially, this model indicates that you can be on a journey of change that begins with pre-contemplation, not even thinking that change is even necessary, not even being aware that change is necessary, through to contemplation, thinking about maybe this might be something I need to think about doing at some point, to planning. I'm now committing to doing something and this is how I will do it, through to action, doing, actually implementing, putting those changes into your world, and then evaluating. So reflecting on what have I achieved and what can I use to continue forward. And particularly because we know if people become too threatened, they're going to disengage and they're going to step out of that stage of change and go back to pre-contemplation. Having opportunities like being exposed to art, being involved in the creation of art is much less threatening than sitting in a climate change panel. It is a safer space with less threat in which people can actually allow themselves to engage at the level that they're comfortable with and use that as a platform to continue forward. Engaging with traditional owners and providing it's appropriate and safe for traditional owners, Indigenous peoples, becoming more aware of those traditional songs, of those traditional activities, and recognising the power that has for individuals and uplifting the well-being of all. So the stages of change model helps us understand that what does change look like? It depends on who you are and where you're at. So what does success look like? If one person can move from pre-contemplation to contemplation, and one person moves from contemplation to planning, one from planning to action, and one from action to reflection, that's success. And the more that we support people in doing so, the more success we will achieve.
This is such a fantastic panel in terms of just this collection of amazing voices and perspectives. And Courtney, you have the honor of rounding us out on what success looks like.
That's a lot of pressure. Those were wonderful responses. I'm so inspired. I have goosebumps. I mean, I love what everyone said. And I think that just opening up to curiosity is such a powerful thing. So I think my measure of success would be young kids around the world in their different communities, which all experience the ocean in different ways. Having them experience joy and curiosity and exploration and just looking under the surface and peeking inside and seeing what's underwater. I think that is so valuable to inspire little kids to grow up to become stewards. And I think if, thousands or millions of kids from all around the world were allowed to kind of value that in their lives and empowered to incorporate that into what they think about on a day-to-day basis, in addition to all the other kind of important parts of growing up and education and everything, I think that would create some really innovative and inclusive leaders in the future. So that would be how I would measure success.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to spend the last bit of time we have for questions from the audience. So please drop any questions you have in the chat, and I'm going to pull this up and start looking. Oh my goodness, we have quite a robust conversation happening. I saw one earlier that I thought was interesting. It was from Mark Caprone, but just, he made the note that the California Natural Resources Agency is struggling with the definition of conservation. And I think that's actually a really fascinating question that kind of builds off of what we've been talking about. But what is conservation? How have we been looking at conservation? How should we change the definition of conservation if you think there could be change or a deepening kind of conversation in the way we think about conservation? Would anyone like to take that question?
I'll
Anyone?
speak briefly.
Okay.
From a psychological perspective, this is fundamentally one of the challenges we have. When it's not clear what we're working towards, people's ability to engage with the process is severely undermined. And so in terms of what do we mean by conservation, I don't think we truly know yet, because again, I think to date that a lot of the definitions have been overly influenced by very westernized, very white conceptualizations. And therefore, again, it's an opportunity for us to think about co-creating what conservation means, and in the process, creating a space for people to be involved in putting that into action.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on what conservation should mean, could mean, is meaning right now, and where we can go from here?
Just one thought, that I think the ocean can heal itself if we let it, like giving fish stocks a break and giving different ecosystems a break from human impacts can yield some really surprisingly fast results in terms of recovery. And so I think it's important to think about that in all kinds of different aspects.
Great, and thank you. And Dr. Oda just wrote in the chat, I think the definition is fine, but implementation is what needs to be addressed and discussed. Very great point. And Yoshi also asked, can we work on reducing the source of climate change? Would it, for ocean solutions? And and Rachel expanded on this in the chat as well, but we do have to hold those accountable who are doing the most impacts, but how do we increase avenues for accountability, regionally, globally, locally, and increase pressure and action? Because I think, we talk about adaptation to all of these changes and to be more inclusive, but how do we hold folks accountable for the mitigation part and for the ones doing the most damage? Would anyone, maybe Rachel, you can expand on some of your remarks in the chat.
Yeah, I guess we need to hold the most major impacting organizations and businesses more accountable through all avenues and all streams of advocacy and compliance and legal, and whether that's from top down internationally, maybe we need more pressure, I think, to back up locally, because in a lot of our countries where there's corruption, we need backup. And that's urgent because we're faced with some really pressing sustainability challenges. And at the same time, we're on the front lines of one of the most fast changing, fast developing regions of the world, but also with a wealth of biodiversity and environment and this massive blue Pacific, alongside all the other regions of the world, the biodiversity hotspots of the world and cultural hotspots of the world need action, urgent action and support. And I think any ways, any avenues, I think we need full force to come down on those industries that are doing the most damage and harm. More accountability, especially in countries that are challenged with corruption and compliance and local constraints and challenges.
Thank you. And we have a question, sifting through the chat here, from Rod Fujita. Participatory bottom-up decision-making processes that integrate traditional knowledge definitely help ensure more equitable solutions, but are they enough? Do we also need to alter the power structures that continue to leave people out and marginalize their needs, values, and knowledge? Great question, going back to our point about power. Mark, maybe you could weigh in on this one, but how do we need to alter the power structures, and how do we do that? How are some ways we could do that?
Wow. Well, that's a tough one. I don't even kind of want to touch it too much because I think the best thing as far as altering that power structure is through the education. I'm super hopeful seeing a lot of young people, young adults. I'm 50 years old, but seeing my colleagues who are doing some great things because we are giving proper access to education. You know, I've been doing this for quite over 25 years, so I see what I call micro generations now as tribal leaders that have been in our program who are doing great things. So I think it's, again, a little bit of patience. The power structures, I don't, you know, like I said, I think there's just people, there's people that, like she was saying, are in corruption, that are getting money, they're tied to too many large whatever. But the pendulum has to swing back, and I think, as far as I'm concerned, my role in it is education, and to tell people to, you know, stop with the fantasy in regards to where we're at with education. We have to abolish a lot of these things that have been in place for so long. You know, we really have to. It's going to take all of us. You know, like you were saying about conservation, we can't show up to a coastal area talking about conserve this and conserve that, but oh, you guys, no, we can't conserve your remains, or we can't, because it threatens their position. Like she was saying, there's a threat there. They're gonna, you know, we're gonna take back that university property now, you know, or, you know, it just puts too much. I don't want to threaten nobody, but we need to come and hold some ground. You know what I mean? Especially in Southern California, you know, with the media capital of the world. You know, nobody knows that there's Native American folks that live in Southern California for the most part. You know, even people in San Diego don't know that we exist. So it's one of those things that, well, geez, you know, it starts with that education, that inclusivity in the narrative. And that's, I think, what we're all doing. What my job is to disrupt that narrative, to start to replacing with these images, you know, these positive images of doing that. I really want us to try to stay in the positive column by producing these positive images, because, yeah, you know, knocking at the door at the university there after so many years and sitting in so many meetings, you know, I said, you know what, I'm going to go in a different direction. It's taking too much energy and away from what I need to be doing. I want to just be in the positive column with just doing what we have to do, because sometimes I don't know if it's I lose hope in those guys, but I think their priorities are somewhere else. I don't know where they're at, but they're not with real change in that sense.
Thank you for that. And we're getting some great chats here. So I'm gonna look for another, is there questions in the chat? Actually, it looks like Kimberly, you had a few thoughts. Do you want to expand on what you were dropping into the chat while I look for another question?
Sure, not a problem. I think the other thing, of course, we can leverage off are things like learning principle theories. So we know from a lot of research evidence that positive reinforcement, which was actually what Mark was just talking about, keeping it in a positive space, creating a safe space rather than necessarily threatening or increasing perceived threat, is the strongest method of motivational change. When you couple positive reinforcement, which is essentially rewarding people for the behavior you want to see, and rewarding them in a way that's meaningful for them, so that we'll continue that behavior, coupled with some form of punishment. So if you deviate too far, then you lose something you like, or something you don't like is imposed. That is actually the strongest way of shaping behavior, and that's across species. That actually happens whether you're a single-celled organism right through to various other primates, ourselves included. The other part of this idea of recreating spaces is it reassures people, because sometimes what happens is if we have a thought that isn't shared by those in the immediate vicinity, we start to second guess ourselves. We start to question that maybe I'm the odd one out, maybe I'm wrong. Whereas to have exposure to these different ideas and thoughts through the media, as some people have been suggesting, helps to reassure us that there's not something unusual about us, that others are like-minded, and in doing so, it supports us to continue in those patterns of behaviours, even if those immediately around us aren't engaging in them.
Thank you, Kimberly. And I mean, this idea of rewarding is so interesting to me. Like, I think that's a really powerful point, but what does rewarding look like? Like, how do you, what's the carrot, and how do we get, what isn't, I don't know if you can think of one off the top of your head, but what would be a good example of a small reward to help get more people here on board.
This is actually part of that issue of co-creating knowledge. The carrot will be different depending on who you are, what your short and long-term goals are, and what your resources are. So when Rachel was speaking earlier about the fact that many of the communities who are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change and the ocean's vulnerability are actually often disempowered to make those changes. And their carrots might be very different to the carrots that a large global corporation who's engaging in non-environmentally supportive behaviours would respond to. So it's about, again, creating a space where we work with these communities to understand what is it they want and what are they motivated by, and then leverage on those points to create a personalised approach that motivates them, so that eventually we will move towards a space in which we do share an overarching motivation, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. And I think, one thing we keep going back to this word collective, and this talk is about, the ecosystem, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but just I think there is this like greater need to see us as part of the ocean, as part of, because I think as we're talking about these polluters too, like this, there is a disconnect, right? Still from, our like feeling responsible, and our, on the one hand, it's like we need to empower everyone, but also I think there is still slightly a disconnect with a lot of people on how connected they are to the ocean. So I don't know if anyone would like to speak to just like, again, this idea that for so long the narrative has been man versus nature versus like, man as not separate from nature, but as part of nature, and, not even the word man, which is a very old school way of thinking about it, but just, yeah, this idea that we really need to think about humans as part of this ecosystem. And I don't know if there are any closing thoughts any one of you might have on just how we really bring people back into the ocean ecosystem.
Sylvia Earle, the oceanographer, always says that humans are sea creatures, and I totally agree.
Well, actually, I have one more question in the chat that I just received from Manu, which is a great way to close. After this wonderful conversation, what are the main take-home messages to inform the development of this vision that we're having? So I'm going to have everyone kind of speak one more point, one more main take-home message, and we'll start with Rachel.
Thank you. I'll speak from the ECOPS, the early career ocean professionals perspective. I think it's very important to get ECOPS involved in this knowledge sharing process, so that we're all coming together, and it's across generations, because we all have contribution to make, whether you're an early career person or you're more senior. I think it's very important for such platforms for opportunities for sharing knowledge.
All right, and Mark, take home message to help inform the development of this greater vision.
Well, I mentioned something earlier, and I think they kind of have the blueprint as of right now, and that's the Polynesian Voyaging Society with what they did with the Hokulea Worldwide Voyage. If anybody's watching this that's not familiar with that, you should really check it out. Polynesian Voyaging Society, or the Hokulea Worldwide Voyage, especially for Indigenous people, to see how, again, that disrupts the narrative, how we're using this ancient form of navigation, of understanding the ocean, not just the ocean, all the oceans, worldwide. So for me, that type of engagement has been kind of, again, our blueprint, and thank God we have these mentors that are out there doing this, and the background story of them even reinvigorating that type of practice. And when I saw at the end of the worldwide voyage, when the Hokulea came back to its port in Oahu, all these other little traditional voyaging canoes from other parts of the South Pacific showed up. It kind of reminded me of like a lowrider type of car show, because it was like they just showed up, and I was like, gosh, we all should have something like that, because a lot of us have this maritime story, so we could. And again, it's not just so we can go and just cruise the sea, but it's like, again, that being that real integral, intimate relationship, getting that relationship back, so we can, I think, up our game in today's time as stewards, as Indigenous people. And again, my take home too was, I don't know how you all chose these panelists, but you did the perfect job by having our psychological perspective and our artist perspective. This is exactly how we run our education programs as well. It's like, this is so part of it. You can't have this left out. This is what we kind of would consider kind of as that medicine wheel of having these types of components. You can't, in order to have balance, you must have these components in a conversation of moving forward, of healing. And when you think of a medicine wheel, sometimes we just see it just sitting there, but really what it's doing, it's moving. So this is part of this movement. And again, hats off to whoever put this panel together, and to all the experts that are involved in today's talk.
Thank you, Mark. Kimberly?
Perhaps 3 words really sum it up. And they're words that have been spoken by the panelists today, and as well as the audience members. Patience, connection, and hope. Patience in that we will get there, and every small change towards that desired future is a change in the right direction. And multiple changes over time will see us achieve the goals that those people here share. Connection, not just with the ocean, but with one another. Once we establish that true connection with one another, and I'm going back to Mark's words of the human family, through that connection, we build collaboration and trust that allows us to achieve those goals. And finally, hope. When there's something to look forward to and something to work towards, we are all much more likely to stay motivated, and it also enhances our health and well-being. Helps us not to give up. So patience, connection, and hope.
Wow. And amen to that. Courtney, take us home.
Well, I think my comments probably relate most to the younger participants and students, but I think it's applicable to everyone. I think eccentricity is a virtue. If you love something, like if you love the ocean, if you love researching tiny invertebrates at the bottom of the seafloor, or if you love creating art about them, or you love creating dances to celebrate kind of the beauty of the ocean waves, or sailing across it, or whatever it is, find what you can uniquely do and don't stop. Don't let anyone tell you that it's impractical or unrealistic, because that passion is what really inspires people.
Thank you all. Wow, I have goosebumps just from this conversation today. Just thank you so much for bringing so much heart and patience and compassion to this conversation today. I think we're right up on time, so I'm going to pass the virtual mic back to Erin, I believe.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was such an exciting and engaging discussion. I'm honestly blown away. It was super fun, and I feel like it really had that emergent quality that I could not have foreseen. So I guess just in closing, I really liked, Rosanna, what you said. I think we really weave together a lovely mosaic. And what really stood out to me was that power of recreation, from using art to inspire hope, creating these new neural connections, bringing people out into the environment to play, celebrate, and really recreate the linkages to the ocean, as well as the importance of reshaping these critical processes to bring this explicit recognition, inclusion, and trust of Indigenous people and diverse ways of knowing, and really bringing in communities. And all of this, as I think Kimberly, you just said so well, require hope, patience, curiosity, connection, and bringing our unique voices and skills to this shared vision. So I'd really like to thank all of our fabulous speakers, the panelists, the summit organizers, and session leads. And thanks to all of you for joining today. We have a couple of closing announcements, but we're really looking forward to seeing how this evolves. So if you'd like to keep kind of part of this conversation, we have a link that we'll put into the chat. And also, if you're interested in staying involved and continuing this discussion tomorrow, we'll have a networking session from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. So you'll have to do some conversions for different time zones. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Karen.
Thanks, Erin. I can't start my video, now I can start my video. Great, excellent. So just to let everyone know that we do have a follow-on session from this particular session. It's a special event being hosted by Hobart, which is focused around ocean solutions, what is needed for success in Tasmania, and that starts in 1 hour. And the special event, even though it has Tasmania in the title, it's really focused around how you can translate global concepts for ocean solutions and develop and implement them on local scales. And we heard a lot today about local actions that we can take in both developing solutions, but also bringing those solutions to implementation and success. The special event has an exciting program, including a keynote, which is focused on sustainability and the blue economy, a panel session exploring the key considerations for deployment of solutions. And we'll also have a breakout session where we can hopefully get the audience involved and exploring potential solutions at local scales and identifying actions for implementation. And we're going to follow up this special event with another in September or October, where we'll revisit some of the potential solutions and actions and see how we've progressed with those. So it's really about inspiring everyone and facilitating actually implementing some solutions or a pathway to that solutions. And finally, we'd love to know who was here today and stay in touch. And as Erin identified, we'll put a link in the chat where you can all sign up and keep in the conversation. We've certainly talked a lot about an inclusive conversation, and we'd certainly like to support that. So I'd just like to thank all of our speakers today. Such a great conversation. And I'd like to thank you all for coming along today and taking part in session 6. Thank you very much, everyone.